I spent $16,000 on my niece's surgery, then got uninvited from her recovery party. She needs positive energy. The glowing screen felt like ice in my hand. My niece was in recovery. My $16,000 wired just hours ago had saved her. I'd emptied my savings, not even thinking twice. Family. That's what I believed in. That's what I always believed in. But then the text came. It was from my sister, Sarah. Short, sharp, like a knife. She needs positive energy only. Okay, please don't come. No thank you. No sorry. Just those cold words. Exile. From my own family. From the side of the little girl I'd just saved. It hit me in the gut. Hard. My niece, Lily. Sweet Lily. Just 6 years old. She'd needed emergency surgery. A tricky procedure. Everyone had panicked. Everyone had cried. And I'd picked up the phone, made the calls, and sent the money. Just like I always did. But this time was different. This time their gratitude was a locked door. My sister, my own flesh and blood, had just uninvited me from Lily's recovery party. The party for a life I had paid to save. My chest felt tight. My breath hitched. The words replayed in my head over and over. She needs positive energy only. Please don't come. The message wasn't just an uninvitation. It was a dismissal. It was a rejection. It was a clear sign that, to them, I was not positive. I was not wanted. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt it. Not a whisper, but a shout. I wasn't family to them. I was just a resource, a bank. And now I was an inconvenience. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. The screen went dark, just like my hope. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment where are you watching from. I am Ava Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my designated role in the Mitchell family has been that of the fixer. It wasn't a title that was ever spoken aloud, but it was understood in every panicked phone call, every late-night text, every sigh of relief that followed one of my bank transfers. My family operated on a simple, unspoken principle. When there was a problem, Ava would handle it. It started subtly, as these things often do. When I was in college, working 2 jobs to stay afloat, my mom would call. Ava, honey, the car needs a new alternator. Your father's worried sick, but you know how his pension is. There was never a direct ask, just a carefully constructed narrative of woe that always ended with a heavy sigh. And I, filled with a daughter's sense of duty, would say the magic words, "Don't worry. Mom, I've got it." I'd transfer the $500 I had been saving for new textbooks, and in return I'd get a relieved, "Oh, you're a lifesaver, sweetie." The textbooks could wait. My family couldn't. As I got older, and my career in finance began to take shape, the requests grew in both frequency and scale. My parents, who had always praised my responsible nature, began to see my savings account as an extension of their own. They were good people, I told myself. They just weren't good with money. But the truth, a truth I was slowly and painfully beginning to accept, was that they weren't good with boundaries either. My financial stability wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a safety net they felt entitled to. Then there was my sister, Sarah. 2 years younger than me, she was the artist, the free spirit, the one who was celebrated for her passion while I was merely commended for my practicality. Our parents had poured their emotional and financial resources into her various creative pursuits, none of which ever seemed to pan out. When her dream of becoming a painter resulted in a mountain of debt from art supplies, I was the one who quietly paid off her credit cards. When she decided to pivot to pottery, I was the one who funded the expensive kiln that now sits in her garage, collecting dust. I remember one specific Saturday afternoon vividly. I had just received a small promotion at work, and I was planning to celebrate by finally starting a serious investment portfolio for myself. It was the first time I felt like I was getting ahead, building something that was truly mine. My phone rang. It was Sarah. "Ava, you will not believe the opportunity that just fell into my lap," she began, her voice bubbling with an excitement that I had come to associate with an impending financial request. "There's this exclusive jewelry-making workshop in Santa Fe. It's taught by the Isadora Vance. This could be it, Ava. This could be the thing that finally launches my career." I took a deep breath. "That sounds amazing, Sarah. But isn't that kind of expensive?" "Well, yeah," she said, her voice taking on a slightly wounded tone. "But it's an investment. You, of all people, should understand investments. It's only $3,000 for the week-long intensive. $3,000. The exact amount I had planned to put into my new portfolio. I could feel the familiar weight settling in my chest. "Sarah, I'm not sure I can swing that right now," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh," she said. The silence that followed was heavy and accusatory. Then came the guilt. "It's just, I thought you'd be happy for me. I see you in your fancy office, making all that money, and sometimes I wonder if you remember what it's like to have a dream." The words were a punch to the gut. My dream, at that moment, was to have a single dollar that wasn't already earmarked for someone else's emergency. But I couldn't say that. It would make me the bad guy, the unsupportive sister, the one who was selfish with her fancy office money. So I did what I always did. I folded. Okay, I said, the word tasting like defeat. Let me see what I can do. I transferred the money. The investment portfolio remained a distant dream. Sarah went to Santa Fe, came back with a few silver rings, and within a month had moved on to her next passion, artisanal soap making. I never saw the $3,000 again, and no one ever asked me about my own dreams. This pattern repeated itself in countless variations. There was the time Dad had a minor health scare, and their insurance wouldn't cover the full cost of the specialist. I paid the remaining $2,500 without a second thought. My reward was a brief phone call from my mom, who spent most of the time talking about how stressful the whole ordeal had been for her. There was the time my parents decided to remodel their kitchen, a project they couldn't afford, and I ended up loaning them the money for the granite countertops they insisted were a necessary upgrade. The loan was never repaid. It was never even mentioned again. I became an expert at suppressing my own needs. I drove a 10-year-old car, lived in a modest apartment, and rarely took vacations. Every spare dollar I had was put into a high-yield savings account, not for a down payment on a house for myself, but for the inevitable next family crisis. I was the emergency fund, the lender of last resort, the silent, invisible partner in all their financial decisions. And through it all, they would gather for family dinners and talk about the importance of family unity. They would praise Sarah's creativity and my father's resilience, never once acknowledging the financial scaffolding that I had built to keep their world from collapsing. My contribution was as essential and as invisible as the oxygen in the room. They breathed it in, took it for granted, and never once stopped to think about where it came from. This history, this long and exhausting legacy of being the family fixer, was weighing heavily on my mind when Sarah's text about Lily's surgery came through. It was the biggest fix of my life, $16,000. It was a staggering amount, one that would take me years to recover from, but it was for Lily, for my niece. And so I did it. I transferred the money, my hands shaking as I watched my savings account dwindle to almost nothing. I had expected gratitude. I had expected a tearful phone call, a heartfelt thank you, a recognition of the magnitude of my sacrifice. What I got was a digital slap in the face, a cold, dismissive text telling me to stay away. And in that moment, I realized the horrifying truth of my position in the family. I wasn't the fixer. I was the tool. And now that the job was done, I was being put back in the toolbox, out of sight and out of mind. The days following Sarah's text were a blur of hollow silence. I went to work, sat at my desk, and stared at spreadsheets, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes. I felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if I were watching my life from a great distance. I didn't reach out to my family, and they, in turn, offered me nothing. No updates on Lily's condition, no follow-up calls, not even a perfunctory, "How are you doing?" It was as if, by sending that money, I had fulfilled my purpose and ceased to exist. The discovery of the party was accidental. I was scrolling aimlessly through my social media feed on a Saturday afternoon, trying to distract myself from the crushing emptiness of my apartment, when a photo popped up. It was posted by my cousin Jessica. The image was bright, chaotic, and filled with a joy that felt like a personal attack. It was a picture of my entire family, aunts, uncles, cousins, my parents, and Sarah, all gathered in a rented event space. They were wearing matching pink t-shirts. In the center of the frame, my mother was holding a beaming Lily, who looked happy and healthy. The caption read, "Celebrating our little fighter Lily. So proud of this strong family for pulling together. Family first." My heart stopped. My fingers trembled as I clicked on Jessica's profile. There were more photos, dozens of them. A professional-looking banner hung on the wall reading Lily's Road to Recovery. There were pink balloons everywhere, a 3-tiered cake decorated with cartoon characters, and a table laden with catered food. It wasn't just a small get-together. It was an elaborate, expensive party. I saw my father laughing with my uncle. I saw my mother dabbing a tear from her eye as she watched Lily open a mountain of presents. I saw cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, all smiling for the camera, all part of this perfect portrait of family unity. And in every photo, there was a glaring, gaping hole where I should have been. Then I saw the video. It was a short clip of Sarah making a speech. She stood in the center of the room holding a microphone, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This has been the hardest week of my life, and I honestly don't know how we would have gotten through it without the love and support of our amazing family. When we all come together, we can overcome anything." The room erupted in applause. People were hugging her, patting her on the back, telling her how strong she was. The camera panned across the crowd, and I saw my parents looking at her with expressions of pure adoration. My mother mouthed the words, "Our hero." The hypocrisy was so staggering, so profoundly dishonest, that I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Our amazing family? We can overcome anything? They hadn't overcome anything. I had. I had overcome the financial obstacle that stood between them and this very celebration. My sacrifice was the foundation upon which this entire party was built, and they were all dancing on it, completely oblivious, or worse, completely indifferent. I scrolled through the comments on the photos. What a beautiful family. Sarah, you are the strongest mom I know. Sending so much love to the Mitchell clan. Each comment was another twist of the knife. The narrative had been written, and I had been completely erased from it. I wasn't just uninvited. My contribution, my very role in the ordeal, had been stolen and credited to some vague notion of family strength. The matching t-shirts were the cruelest detail. On the back, in cursive script, were the words, Lily's tribe. I was not part of the tribe. I was the outsider who had paid the tribe's dues and then been cast out. I imagined the conversations that must have taken place. The planning of the party, the ordering of the cake, the designing of the t-shirts. At what point did they decide to exclude me? Was it a conscious decision, a topic of discussion? Or was I so insignificant to them that my absence wasn't even a consideration? I felt a cold, hard anger begin to form in the pit of my stomach. It was different from the hurt and confusion I had been feeling. This was a clear, sharp rage. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had deliberately and actively excluded me, all while celebrating a victory that I had single-handedly secured for them. They had taken my money, used it to save their child, and then thrown a party to congratulate themselves on their own resilience. I zoomed in on one of the photos. Sarah was holding a glass of champagne, a wide, triumphant smile on her face. She looked carefree, radiant. The weight of the world, the weight that I had been carrying for her, had been lifted, and she was basking in the glory. And in her eyes, I saw the reflection of a truth I had been avoiding for years. To her, to all of them, my sacrifices weren't sacrifices at all. They were expectations. They were my duty. And my presence was not a gift, but an inconvenience, a reminder of the debt they had no intention of ever acknowledging, let alone repaying. I closed the app, my hands shaking. The silence of my apartment was no longer just empty, it was mocking. The party was still going on, the laughter still echoing, the celebration of family first continuing without me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that something inside me had broken. The part of me that had always made excuses for them, the part that had always held out hope for their love and recognition, had finally shattered. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of their betrayal. The rage didn't subside. It simmered, a low, constant heat beneath the surface of my skin. For the next few hours, I paced the length of my small apartment, a caged animal of my own making. My mind raced, composing and deleting 100 different text messages, each one more scathing than the last. I imagined calling Sarah, my voice dripping with the venom I felt in my heart. I pictured confronting my parents, laying out every sacrifice, every dollar, every missed opportunity, and demanding to know why it was never enough. But what would that accomplish? I knew them. I knew their patterns, their defense mechanisms. My anger would be dismissed as jealousy. My hurt would be labeled as an overreaction. They would turn it around, twist my words, and paint me as the unstable, ungrateful daughter who was trying to ruin their moment of joy. Sarah's words echoed in my head. She needs positive energy only. I was the negative energy. Any attempt to communicate my pain would only prove their point, solidifying my role as the family villain. Then, a text from my mother buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up with a sense of dread. Sarah said Lily loved her party. It was such a beautiful day. You should have been there, Ava. You always let your sensitivity get the best of you. That was it. That was the final straw. You always let your sensitivity get the best of you. It was their classic move, the ultimate gaslighting technique. My valid emotional response to their cruelty was being framed as a personal failing, a character flaw. They weren't just excluding me. They were absolving themselves of all responsibility by blaming my own nature. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The desire to scream and fight was replaced by a sudden, chilling clarity. They didn't deserve my anger. They didn't deserve my words. They didn't deserve any more of my energy, positive or negative. The only response they deserved was the one thing they never gave me. Nothing. Silence. I walked over to my laptop, my movements calm and deliberate. I opened a travel website, the colorful pictures of exotic locations a stark contrast to the gray landscape of my emotions. My finger hovered over the search bar. For years, I had dreamed of going to a quiet beach town, a place where I could read, walk, and simply be, without the constant pressure of my family's needs. There was always a reason not to go. A new crisis, a new demand on my finances. But now, the biggest crisis was my own, and the only person who could fix it was me. I typed the name of a small, secluded town on the coast, a place I had read about in a magazine. Flights were available. A small, charming cottage was for rent, just steps from the ocean. Without allowing myself a moment to second guess, I booked it. A one-way ticket. I didn't know when I would be back. I didn't care. Packing was a surreal experience. I moved through my apartment on autopilot, grabbing a few changes of clothes, a couple of books, my journal. With each item I placed in my duffel bag, I felt a layer of responsibility, of obligation, sloughing off. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my dad. "Your mother is worried. Call her." I looked at the device in my hand. It was a leash, a direct line to their endless well of need. I held down the power button and watched the screen go black. Then for good measure, I put it on airplane mode. The little icon of the plane was a promise of escape. The drive to the airport was the first time I had felt a sense of peace in weeks. The city lights of Denver receded in my rearview mirror, and with them, the suffocating weight of my family. I was a ghost, slipping away in the night, leaving behind no explanation, no forwarding address. They had erased me from their celebration, so I was erasing myself from their lives. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching as we ascended through the thick layer of clouds. The world below became a patchwork of lights, distant and disconnected. I thought about them, back in their homes, probably shaking their heads and talking about moody Ava. They would expect me to come crawling back as I always did, ready to forgive and forget. They had no idea that this time was different. This time the silence wasn't a punishment. It was a choice. My choice. When I landed, the air was warm and thick with the smell of salt. The sound of the ocean was a gentle, rhythmic roar in the distance. I found my rented cottage, a tiny, weathered blue house with a porch that looked out onto the waves. I dropped my bag, walked out onto the sand, and didn't stop until the water was lapping at my ankles. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I stood there for a long time, letting the vastness of the ocean swallow up the smallness of my pain. This was a silence I could control, a silence that was healing, not hurtful. It wasn't the lonely silence of being ignored, but the powerful silence of choosing oneself. I had spent my entire life answering their calls. Now I was finally listening to my own. I took a deep breath of the salty air, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt free. For 3 days I lived in a blissful bubble of self-imposed exile. I woke with the sun, walked for miles along the deserted beach, and read books on my small porch, the rhythmic crash of the waves my only companion. I didn't turn on my phone. I didn't check my email. I allowed myself to be completely, utterly unreachable. It was a detox, a purging of the toxic dependency that had defined my life for so long, but I knew it couldn't last forever. On the 4th morning, with a sense of grim resolution, I reconnected my phone to the world. I sat on my porch, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and watched as the notifications flooded in. It was an avalanche. Dozens of missed calls, over 100 text messages, a string of increasingly frantic voicemails. I started with the texts, my thumb scrolling through a timeline of their escalating panic. The first few were from Sarah. "Hey, the hospital sent another bill. Said there was an extra charge for post-op meds. It's $1,600. Can you handle it? Need it paid by tomorrow." A few hours later, another one. "Ava, did you get my text? This is urgent." Then, the messages from my mother began. "Ava, honey, Sarah is very stressed. The caterer from the party has been calling her non-stop. She says the bill was never paid. Sarah thought you were taking care of it as a gift for Lily. Please call me. A gift for Lily?" The audacity was breathtaking. They had uninvited me from the party, and then had the gall to assume I would be paying for it. I could picture the scene perfectly. Sarah, basking in the praise of her friends and family, casually mentioning that her responsible, financially stable sister was handling all the boring details. The messages became more demanding. My father chimed in with his usual bluntness. "Ava, this is not a game. Your sister is in a tough spot. Call us." Then came the guilt, wielded with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. An aunt I hadn't heard from in months sent a long, rambling message about the importance of family. "You know, Ava, family doesn't keep score. We have to be there for each other in good times and in bad. Your sister is so hurt that you're ignoring her. Family doesn't keep score." The phrase was a familiar refrain, a convenient excuse they used whenever they wanted to erase a debt, financial or emotional. But I was done playing by their rules. I had kept score, meticulously, and now it was time to settle the accounts. My first call was not to my family, but to the hospital's billing department. I explained the situation calmly and professionally, my voice devoid of the emotion that was churning in my gut. "I'm calling to inquire about an outstanding balance for my niece, Ava Mitchell," I said. I was told there was an additional charge of $1,600. The woman on the other end of the line was polite and efficient. I could hear the clicking of her keyboard as she pulled up the account. "No, ma'am," she said after a moment. The account for Ava Mitchell was paid in full. The total was $16,000, and we received a wire transfer for that exact amount. There are no outstanding charges. The confirmation was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Sarah had lied. She had deliberately tried to scam me out of another $1,600. My next step was to find the contact information for the party caterer and the event rental company. I composed a short, polite email to each of them. "To whom it may concern," I wrote. It has come to my attention that my sister, Ava Mitchell, has listed me as the responsible party for services rendered for a private event. Please be advised that I did not authorize these services, nor did I agree to pay for them. In fact, I was explicitly uninvited from the event in question. For good measure, I attached a screenshot of Sarah's original text message to me. All financial agreements are solely between your company and Ms. Mitchell. I wish you the best in resolving this matter. I hit send and felt a grim sense of satisfaction. I was no longer the silent fixer. I was a source of information, a beacon of truth in the sea of their lies. Finally, I turned my attention to the family group chat. It was a torrent of accusations and pleas. I ignored them all and typed a single, concise message. To clarify a few points, I have spoken with the hospital. Lily's surgery was paid in full with my $16,000 payment. There is no outstanding balance. Any claims of an additional $1,600 invoice are fraudulent. Furthermore, I will not be paying for any expenses related to the recovery party, as I was not in attendance. I have already informed the vendors of this. I hope Lily is continuing to recover well. I read the message over once, my finger hovering over the send button. This was it, the final declaration of my independence. I pressed send. The message appeared in the chat, a stark, undeniable statement of fact. Then, before anyone could respond, before the inevitable storm of denials and accusations could begin, I began the process of blocking them. Sarah's number was first. Block. My mother. Block. My father. Block. My aunt. Block. With each tap of the screen, I felt a chain breaking. The silence that followed was different from the silence of my beach escape. This was a permanent silence, a wall that I had built brick by brick, a fortress to protect my own peace. The Bank of Ava was officially, irrevocably closed. The fallout was no longer my problem, it was theirs. And for the first time in my life, I was content to let them fix their own mess. The silence that followed my digital exodus was both liberating and terrifying. For the first week, I existed in a state of suspended animation. My quiet beach cottage became a sanctuary, a fortress against a world that had demanded too much. I changed my phone number, an act that felt as significant as changing my name. I informed my job that I was taking an extended, unpaid leave of absence due to a family emergency, the irony of which was not lost on me. I was a ship cut loose from its moorings, adrift in a sea of newfound freedom, but with no map and no destination. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and falling of the tide. I walked, I read, I journaled. I filled pages with the anger and grief I had suppressed for years, the ink a testament to a pain I was finally allowing myself to feel. There was a phantom limb sensation that haunted me in the quiet moments. The ingrained instinct to check my phone for a crisis, the habitual mental calculation of my savings to see if I could cover an unforeseen expense for someone else. These were ghosts of a life I had left behind. I was learning to live for an audience of one, and it was the hardest, most essential work I had ever done. I made small, tentative connections in the small coastal town. There was Maria, the owner of the local cafe, who learned my coffee order by the third day and always greeted me with a warm, genuine smile. There was Ben, the elderly man who ran the town's only bookstore, who recommended novels to me with a quiet passion. These were simple, uncomplicated interactions, devoid of history or expectation. They were balm to my wounded soul. They reminded me that kindness could exist without an invoice attached. About a month into my new, quiet life, an email arrived from an old friend from Denver, a woman named Chloe, who worked in a different department at my company, but with whom I'd always shared a friendly rapport. She wasn't part of my family's inner circle, which was precisely why I had sent her my new email address. The subject line was simple: thinking of you and saw this. Inside was a link to a social media post. My finger trembled as I clicked on it. It took me to the page of a charitable organization called the Brave Little Hearts Foundation, a group that partnered with the hospital where Lily had her surgery. The post featured a professionally taken photograph of Lily, sitting up in her hospital bed, smiling shyly at the camera while holding a teddy bear. The picture was beautiful, capturing her innocence and resilience. It made my heart ache. Then I read the text. "Meet Lily, a 6-year-old with a heart full of courage," it began. Just a few weeks ago, Lily underwent a critical, life-saving surgery. Her family was facing an insurmountable financial burden, but thanks to a last-minute, incredibly generous donation from her aunt, Lily was able to get the care she desperately needed. Today, she is recovering beautifully, a testament to the power of family and the kindness of strangers. While the donor wishes to remain anonymous, we want to celebrate this act of profound generosity. It's a reminder that heroes are all around us. I read it once, then twice, the words blurring through a film of unexpected tears. Heroes are all around us. They had called me a hero. Not my family, not the people who were supposed to love me, but strangers. The foundation, in its effort to inspire others, had inadvertently told the part of the story that my family had worked so hard to erase. Chloe had commented on the post. "This is my wonderful friend Ava Mitchell. She is the most selfless person I know." And from that single comment, the dam broke. The post began to spread like wildfire. It was shared by local news outlets in Denver, by community pages, by parenting blogs. My name, once whispered only in times of need, was now attached to a story of generosity and love. The trickle of notifications on my social media, profiles I had long since abandoned, became a flood. Friend requests and messages poured in from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old teachers from high school, former colleagues from my first job, neighbors from the apartment complex I had lived in 5 years ago. The messages were a chorus of praise. "Ava, I always knew you had a heart of gold. What you did for your niece is truly incredible. You are an inspiration." Each message was a small, sharp contrast to the wall of silence and dismissal I had received from my own family. It was disorienting, like stepping out of a dark room into the bright sunlight. I had been so convinced of my own negative energy, of my own insignificance, that this wave of positive affirmation felt like it was happening to someone else. Then, things began to escalate beyond the digital world. Chloe emailed me again. "Ava, you're not going to believe this. Flowers have been arriving at the office for you all week. And gift baskets. The front desk looks like a florist shop." A local bakery, having seen the story on a news site, had sent a huge basket of pastries. A women's networking group I had once belonged to sent a stunning floral arrangement with a card that read, "Celebrating a true leader in our community." The most touching gesture came from a group of parents whose children had also been treated at the hospital. They had pooled their money and sent a gift certificate for a spa retreat with a handwritten note. "Thank you for showing the world what it means to truly put a child first." From one family who understands to a hero who created one. I sat on my porch reading these messages, my hands shaking. I felt a confusing mix of emotions. There was gratitude, of course, but there was also a profound sense of sadness. Why did it take strangers to see the good in me? Why was the validation I had craved my entire life coming from people I barely knew, while my own family had treated my sacrifice as nothing more than an inconvenient transaction? The spotlight was uncomfortable. I hadn't done it for the praise or the recognition. I had done it because I loved my niece. But the public acknowledgement served a purpose I hadn't anticipated. It cemented the truth. It carved my role in the story into stone, making it impossible for my family to deny or erase. They had wanted to control the narrative, to paint themselves as the heroes of their own story. But the truth, as it so often does, had found a way to come to light. I was no longer the invisible fixer. I was the generous aunt, the community hero, the woman who had saved a little girl's life. The story was out there, and it was a story in which I was not the villain, not the negative energy, but the one who had made the happy ending possible. My silence had been my first act of rebellion. But this unexpected spotlight, this wave of external validation, was my vindication. It was a shield, forged by the kindness of strangers, that I could hold up against the inevitable darkness that I knew was still to come. The peace I had carefully constructed was shattered by the arrival of a certified letter. It had been forwarded from my old address in Denver, making a slow, circuitous journey to my quiet coastal town. The envelope was thick and official-looking, bearing the letterhead of a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid it open with a trembling hand. The words inside were a grotesque distortion of reality, a collection of legal terms that felt both absurd and menacing. It was a formal notice of a lawsuit filed against me by my sister, Ava Mitchell. The charges were as ludicrous as they were insulting: financial sabotage, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and breach of familial duty. I sank into a chair on my porch, the letter rattling in my hand. According to the document, my refusal to pay the outstanding medical bills and the costs of the recovery party had caused Sarah significant financial hardship and public humiliation. My act of contacting the vendors directly was described as a malicious attempt to defame her character, and my silence, my beautiful hard-won silence, was being framed as a form of emotional abuse. They were suing me for not allowing them to use me anymore. The absurdity of it all was so profound that my initial shock gave way to a cold, clear-eyed fury. This wasn't just a desperate money grab. This was a calculated attempt to punish me for my defiance. It was a declaration of war, a final, desperate attempt to drag me back into their toxic orbit and reassert their control. They couldn't stand that I had walked away. They couldn't stand that the public narrative had shifted in my favor. And so they were resorting to the only tactic they had left, trying to legally force me back into the role of the villain. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. The next morning I found a small local law office and made an appointment. My lawyer was a woman named Eleanor Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. I sat in her comfortable office, the smell of old books and fresh coffee in the air, and for the first time, I told the entire story to a complete stranger. I laid out the years of financial support, the constant emergencies, the one-sided nature of our family dynamic. I told her about the surgery, the $16,000, and the cruel text message that had followed. I showed her the photos of the party, the matching Our Family First t-shirts, and the gushing social media posts. I handed her the letter from Sarah's lawyer. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression unreadable. She read through every document, her eyes scanning the pages with a practiced efficiency. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "Well," she said finally, leaning back in her chair, "in my 25 years of practicing family law, I have seen a lot of audacious claims. But this," she said, tapping the lawsuit with her pen, "this is a masterpiece." A small, hysterical laugh escaped my lips. It was the first time I had laughed in weeks. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We fight," Eleanor said, a small, grim smile on her face. "And we do it not with emotion, but with facts. We will drown them in a sea of their own hypocrisy." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. At Eleanor's direction, I began the painstaking process of building our case. It was an emotionally draining but strangely empowering task. I spent days poring over old bank statements, highlighting every transfer I had ever made to my parents and to Sarah. The final tally was staggering, a testament to a decade of one-sided generosity. I printed out every email, every text message, the casual requests for money, the guilt-laden pleas, the dismissive responses to my own rare attempts to set boundaries. I created a timeline, a meticulous, chronological record of their dependency and my compliance. The evidence was overwhelming. It painted a clear, undeniable picture of financial and emotional exploitation. The viral post from the Brave Little Hearts Foundation became our Exhibit A. "They are suing you for financial sabotage," Eleanor said, "and yet a respected charitable organization has publicly lauded you as a hero for your financial generosity." The contradiction is beautiful. The most powerful piece of evidence, of course, was Sarah's own text message. "She needs positive energy only. Okay, please don't come." Eleanor called it the golden ticket. "She can't claim you had a familial duty to attend, let alone pay for, an event from which you were explicitly banished," she explained. "It's a complete contradiction." The day of the pretrial hearing arrived. I flew back to Denver, my stomach in knots. Walking into the courthouse felt like stepping onto a battlefield. My family was already there, huddled together on a bench. My mother shot me a look of pure venom. My father refused to meet my eyes. Sarah, dressed in a demure, conservative dress, looked pale and nervous. She was trying to project an image of a wounded victim. Our case was heard in a small, sterile courtroom. Sarah's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a close, loving family torn apart by my sudden and inexplicable act of cruelty. He described me as volatile and vindictive, claiming I had cut off my family as a way to punish them for a minor misunderstanding. When Sarah took the stand, she was a picture of rehearsed sorrow. She spoke of her love for Lily, her fear during the surgery, and her gratitude for her family's emotional support. She claimed that the uninvitation text was a poorly worded attempt to protect Lily from any potential stress, and that she had always intended for me to be a part of the celebration. She cried as she described the humiliation of having to deal with the unpaid vendors, a situation she claimed I had created out of spite. It was a masterful performance, and for a terrifying moment, I saw a flicker of doubt in the judge's eyes. Then it was Eleanor's turn. She was calm, methodical, and utterly ruthless. She didn't attack Sarah's character. She simply presented the facts. She introduced the bank statements, the endless stream of financial support that flowed in only one direction. She introduced the screenshots of the social media posts, the public celebration that had occurred just days after my act of cruelty. And then she introduced the text message. She had it blown up on a large screen for the entire courtroom to see. "Ms. Mitchell," Eleanor said, her voice even and clear, "you testified that you always intended for your sister to be a part of the celebration. How do you reconcile that statement with this message, sent from your phone, which reads, 'Please don't come'?" Sarah stammered, her composure finally cracking. It was a mistake. I was stressed. I didn't mean it. "So, you're saying you accidentally typed and sent a message explicitly telling your sister, the woman who had just paid $16,000 for your daughter's life-saving surgery, not to attend the recovery party?" The courtroom was silent. Sarah had no answer. The judge, a stern-faced woman with tired eyes, had heard enough. She looked down at Sarah from her bench, her expression one of utter disbelief. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge said, her voice sharp and clear, "filing a frivolous lawsuit is a serious offense. What I have seen here today is not a case of financial sabotage. It is a case of breathtaking ingratitude. Your sister paid for your daughter's surgery out of the goodness of her heart, and your response was to exclude her and then sue her when she refused to continue bankrolling your life. The only emotional distress I see here is that which you have inflicted upon her." She banged her gavel. "This case is dismissed with prejudice, and I am ordering you to pay for your sister's legal fees. Do not ever bring a matter like this into my courtroom again." A wave of relief so profound that it made my knees weak washed over me. It was over. The truth, my truth, had been heard and validated by a court of law. As we walked out of the courtroom, Sarah and my parents stood huddled together, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. For the first time, they had no power over me. Their manipulations, their guilt trips, their lies, they had all been rendered useless by the simple, undeniable weight of the truth. I had walked into that courthouse a victim. I walked out a survivor. The legal victory was a profound and deeply satisfying vindication, but it left a bitter aftertaste. The lengths to which my sister, and by extension my parents, were willing to go to punish and exploit me had been laid bare in the most public and humiliating way. I returned to my coastal sanctuary feeling emotionally battered but resolute. The wall between my new life and my old one had been fortified with the concrete of a legal judgment. I thought naively that this would be the end of it. A few weeks later, Eleanor called me. "Ava," she said, her voice unusually somber. "I was doing some final research, tying up the loose ends from the case, and I stumbled upon something. I think you need to see it." She emailed me a link. My stomach twisted into a familiar knot of dread as I clicked it. The page that loaded was a GoFundMe campaign. The title was, "Help Sweet Lily on Her Long Road to Recovery." And the photo, the main photo at the top of the page, was a picture of me and Lily, taken 2 years ago at a family picnic. I was holding her on my lap, both of us laughing, the picture of a happy, loving aunt and her adoring niece. My blood ran cold. I scrolled down and began to read the text, my horror growing with every word. It was written in Sarah's voice, a saccharine, manipulative narrative that was a masterclass in deception. "As many of you know," it began, "our brave little Lily recently underwent a major surgery. We have been so blessed by the outpouring of love and support from our community. We were fortunate that Lily's aunt, Ava, was able to provide some initial help, for which we are grateful. However, the costs associated with her recovery are astronomical. Ongoing physical therapy, specialized medications, and follow-up appointments have left us with a mountain of debt that we simply cannot handle on our own." It went on, describing their fictional financial struggles in heartbreaking detail, painting a picture of a devoted family on the brink of ruin. It was filled with lies, half-truths, and emotional manipulation, all designed to tug at the heartstrings of sympathetic strangers. The campaign had a goal of $50,000, and as I scrolled down, my heart sinking with every inch, I saw that it was working. They had already raised over $30,000. The comment section was filled with messages of support and sympathy. "Praying for your beautiful family. Sent a little something to help. Stay strong! Sarah, you are such an amazing mother." I felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. They had used my face, my relationship with my niece, as a prop in their disgusting play. They had acknowledged my initial contribution only to leverage it for their own financial gain, making it seem like a small drop in a vast ocean of debt. This wasn't just ingratitude anymore. This was calculated, premeditated fraud, but it was a small, seemingly insignificant detail at the bottom of the page that sent a true chill down my spine. The campaign organizer was listed not as Sarah Mitchell, but as S. Martin, and the funds, it stated, were being transferred to a registered business account for an entity called Martin Properties, LLC. Something about the name tickled the back of my memory. Martin. I thought back, my mind racing. Sarah's fiancé, a man I had met only a handful of times. A slick, overly charming man who worked in real estate. His name was Derek Martin. My fingers flew across the keyboard. A quick search for Martin Properties LLC confirmed my suspicions. It was a defunct real estate company, registered to Derek Martin, that had been dissolved over a year ago. They were funneling the donations, the money given by kind-hearted strangers who thought they were helping a sick child, into a dead business account. It was a classic money laundering scheme, designed to obscure the trail of the funds. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. The fake $1,600 invoice from the hospital. That wasn't just a clumsy attempt to get more money from me. It was part of a larger strategy to create a paper trail of ongoing medical expenses. The lawsuit. It wasn't just about punishment. It was about discrediting me, painting me as an unreliable narrator in case their scam was ever discovered. The GoFundMe was the centerpiece of their entire plan. They had seen Lily's illness not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity. A business opportunity, and my parents? Their frantic calls, their defense of Sarah, their accusations against me, it all made a sickening kind of sense now. They had to have been in on it. They were all complicit, partners in a conspiracy to defraud not only me, but hundreds of innocent people. The betrayal was so profound, so monstrous, that it almost defied comprehension. This went far beyond a dysfunctional family dynamic. This was a criminal enterprise, with my niece's health as its currency, and my generosity as its seed money. For a moment, I was paralyzed by the sheer evil of it all. My first instinct was to scream, to call them, to confront them with their disgusting secret. But the lessons of the past few months had taught me better. Direct confrontation was their arena. They thrived on emotional chaos. My power was in the calm, methodical application of the truth. I took a deep breath, my mind shifting from shock to strategy. I began to meticulously document everything. I took screenshots of the entire GoFundMe campaign, every photo, every word of text, every donation, every comment. I saved the business registration records for Martin Properties, LLC. I compiled a timeline, linking the date of the surgery, the date of the lawsuit, and the date the GoFundMe was created. I put it all into a single password-protected file. I then composed a new email to Eleanor Vance. The subject line was simple: I think I found something else. In the body of the email, I laid out the facts, attaching the file with all the evidence I had gathered. I ended the email with a single question: what do we do now? Her reply came within the hour. It was short and to the point. This is no longer a family matter, Ava. This is a criminal one. I have a contact in the district attorney's office who specializes in financial fraud. With your permission, I'd like to forward this entire file to them. I stared at her words, the gravity of them sinking in. This was the point of no return. Reporting them to the authorities would set in motion a chain of events that I could not control. It would likely lead to arrests, charges, a public scandal. It would destroy what was left of my family, but what was left to destroy? A hollowed-out shell of lies and exploitation? A group of people who would use a child's illness as a fundraising opportunity? They had already destroyed the family I thought I had. All I could do now was hold them accountable for their actions. My reply to Eleanor was a single word: proceed. Handing the evidence over to the authorities was like releasing a boulder from the top of a mountain. At first, there was nothing but a deafening silence. Then, slowly, I began to hear the rumbles of its descent. The process was slow, methodical, and took place entirely outside of my view, a fact for which I was profoundly grateful. My role was limited to a single, formal interview with an investigator from the district attorney's office. His name was Detective Miller, a tired-looking man with a kind, patient demeanor. I met him at a neutral location, a small coffee shop in a town halfway between my coastal refuge and Denver. For 2 hours, I sat with him and recounted the entire saga, from the years of financial dependency to the GoFundMe page. He listened without interruption, his pen scratching across a notepad. He treated me not as a scorned family member, but as a credible witness to a crime. When I was done, he looked me in the eye and said 2 words that meant more to me than any apology ever could: I believe you. After that, the wall of silence went back up, but I knew that behind it, the wheels of justice were turning. The first news I received came, once again, from my friend Chloe. Her email was short and breathless. Ava, you are not going to believe this. 2 detectives were at your parents' house this morning. I saw their car myself. What is going on? I didn't reply. I simply watched from my safe distance as the consequences of their actions began to ripple through their lives. The GoFundMe campaign was the first to go. One day, the page was simply gone, replaced by a stark red banner that read, "This campaign is currently under investigation for a potential violation of our terms of service. All donations have been frozen and will be returned to the donors." The news of the investigation spread through our old community like a shockwave. The same people who had praised Sarah for her strength were now whispering about fraud. The family that had so carefully curated an image of perfect unity was now the subject of gossip and speculation. Chloe kept me updated in sporadic emails. She told me that Sarah and her fiancé Derek had been brought in for questioning. She told me that neighbors were avoiding my parents, their perfect family image now irrevocably tainted. The public narrative, the one they had fought so hard to control, had been seized from them, replaced by a story of greed and deception. The legal process dragged on for months. Eleanor kept me informed of the major developments. Faced with the mountain of evidence against them, Sarah and Derek had little choice but to cooperate. They eventually took a plea deal to avoid a public trial. The terms of the deal were harsh but fair. They were convicted of wire fraud and conspiracy. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, ordered to perform 2,000 hours of community service, and, most significantly, were required to pay full restitution to every single donor of the GoFundMe campaign. They would be in debt for years, their financial futures crippled by their own greed. My parents, while not criminally charged, were named as persons of interest in the investigation. Their complicity, while not legally provable, was a matter of public record. The shame and social ostracism they faced were a punishment in their own right. The community that had once been their audience was now their jury, and the verdict was a quiet, collective shunning. One day, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, forwarded from my old address. It was a letter from my mother. Her handwriting, once so familiar and comforting, now looked like the scrawl of a stranger. I almost threw it away unopened, but some part of me, some lingering ghost of the daughter I used to be, needed to see it through to the end. The letter was not an apology. It was a torrent of blame, self-pity, and emotional manipulation. She accused me of destroying the family, of being cold and unforgiving, of airing our private business to the world. She wrote about her own shame, her own suffering, framing herself as the ultimate victim in the tragedy I had allegedly orchestrated. "I don't know how you can live with yourself," she wrote in the final venomous line. "I hope you are happy now that you are all alone." I read the letter once, then a second time, and I felt nothing. The words that once would have shattered me, that would have sent me spiraling into a vortex of guilt and self-doubt, were now completely powerless. They were the desperate dying gasps of a narrative that no longer had any hold on me. I walked out to the small fire pit in my backyard, the letter in my hand. I struck a match and held it to the corner of the page. I watched as the flames consumed my mother's words, turning her accusations into gray, weightless ash. As the last embers faded into the twilight, I felt a profound sense of finality. It was over. Justice in its slow, impersonal way had been delivered. My revenge was not in their suffering, but in my own survival. I had not destroyed our family. I had simply stepped away from the wreckage and refused to be buried under it. Their pride had been shattered not by my anger, but by the quiet, unyielding force of the truth. And as the smoke cleared, I realized I wasn't alone. I had myself, and for the first time, that was more than enough. A year has passed since I burned my mother's letter. I never moved back to Denver. I sold my apartment there and used the money, along with what was left of my ravaged savings, to buy the little blue cottage by the sea. It's mine. Every nail, every shingle, every grain of sand on the porch. It's a home built not on obligation but on choice. My life is quiet now. The silence I once chose as a weapon has become my peace. I wake up to the sound of the ocean, not the buzz of a frantic text message. I spend my days working remotely for a new company that values my skills, not my bank account. I have friends, real friends, like Maria from the cafe and Ben from the bookstore, who know nothing of my past and expect nothing from my future other than shared coffee and good conversation. I don't hate my family. The anger, that white-hot rage that once consumed me, has cooled into a distant, sad empathy. They are broken people, trapped in a cycle of their own making. Their punishment is not the legal sentence or the social shame. It is the fact that they will have to live the rest of their lives with the choices they made. Sometimes, I think about Lily. I hope she's happy. I hope she's healthy. I hope she's surrounded by people who love her for who she is, not what she can provide. I had to let go of being her aunt to save myself, and it's a grief I carry with a quiet resignation. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not about absolving them. It's not about saying that what they did was okay. It's about letting go of the hope that they will ever be different. It's about accepting the truth and refusing to let it poison my future. I forgive them not for their sake, but for mine. I forgive them so that I can be free. They used me until I broke. They tried to erase me, sue me, and scam me, but they failed. They took my money, but they couldn't take my strength. They stole my past, but they will never have my future. My peace is something I earned, something I fought for, and it is something they will never, ever be able to touch again. Call to action. Have you ever chosen peace over being used? Like, subscribe, and comment your city and time. Let's see who's here with me tonight.